Hello, friends and scientists. My name is Tracy, and I am an educator here at the Natural History Museum of Utah. And right now we have a special guest. We're doing a live Q&A, and we're super excited to have Dr. Roger Altizer, who is here talking with us today. I'm going to go ahead and just quickly share. If you're tuning in now, you may see that the live stream window is a little bit small. And so I just wanted to let you know that you do have the option to make that window bigger by, on the bottom right of the video, you can make it full screen while you are watching us, okay? Also, if you need to pause the live stream at any point or adjust the volume, that's also right there in the controls. So, hi, welcome. We are so happy to have you here.
I am so happy to be here. It's great to see you again.
Excellent. So we just had class today, and we spent an hour playing the Dino Lab game, which was so much fun. And so that's why we are so happy to have you here.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
How about we start by just an introduction about you and your work, and you are currently the director of the GApp lab, and we would love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So my name's Roger Altizer. I'm a professor of video games up at the University of Utah, and I sort of wear two different hats. I spend half of my time as the director of the Therapeutic Games and Apps lab, which is the lab where Dino Lab was made. And so a lab at a university is just a space where students and faculty gather together to research and make things. And sometimes that might look like chemicals, and sometimes it might look like video games. And so a number of students worked on this game for a few years up there, and we're so happy that you're playing it now. But the other half of my day is in entertainment arts and engineering, which is a college degree in video games. So I teach classes on how to make video games and how to study video games there.
Awesome, that's great. Okay, so today we used Dino Lab, like I said, to better understand the kinds of physical traits that helped dinosaurs survive. And it's a super cool tool to use a simulator like that. So could you talk a little bit about what it takes to build something like Dino Lab, and to build, well, I mean, to build specifically Dino Lab, but in general also, like, what does it take to build a game like that?
Yeah, for sure. So video games have a lot of moving parts in them. There's art, and there's programming, and then there's design. And so it's got a lot of different aspects to it. Dino Lab was one of the examples of, it's one of my favorite games that we've built in the lab. And it's an example of sort of the right way to build video games. We got experts together from the Natural History Museum. And then we also worked with teachers and students in our design process, right? And so instead of saying, I've got a great idea for a video game, we talked to a lot of different people and asked them about their ideas for video games. And in fact, we had a group of junior high school students who worked with us for an entire year on how to do this. And they ran focus groups, which is a time where you get people from the community together and you sort of ask them their opinions, what they like and don't like, what will work and not work. And we got that done with a bunch of students in the lab. And so that was really exciting. So we've been working on this for this was about 3 years in development. And it was done a few times at different stages, right? And then just got better and better each year as we went on. So every semester, so about every 4 or 5 months, there would be 3 to 4 students in the lab working on the game: an artist, an engineer, and someone called a producer. And a producer's job is to make the schedule, make sure everything is organized well, and that we get our tasks done on time. And so that's sort of the background of how the people part of it happens. For the technology part, we used a program called Unity, which is a very popular game engine, which is a piece of technology that allows you to build video games. Unity is the same platform that gets used to make popular video games like Pokemon Go, right? And so this is a piece of software that gets used in the industry to make good looking and fun and interactive games. and that's the top software we used to build Dino Lab. And in that, the programmers write the code. The artists use programs like Photoshop or 3D editing programs like Maya to build all the graphics. And so, like, the dinosaur would have been modeled in a piece of software called Maya, where you build like the 3D shapes and get it all ready. But the colors on it and everything would have been made in Photoshop, and you almost wrap it around it. So, like in a video game, everything looks like a blank 3D statue, and then you wrap it or texture it in two-dimensional art to give it that cool look, right? And so it's always a mix of 2D art and 3D art to make these kinds of games. Yeah, and then we did rinse and repeat on that for a few years and tested it with different folks and got input from students and teachers, and they made it better and better every year until finally you have what you have today.
Awesome. Thank you for walking us through that. I think that's so helpful to sort of understand the big picture. And we'll also hopefully inspire some questions from the students that are tuning in right now. Just so you know, so on the live stream again, if you want to ask a question for Roger, go ahead and submit those right here. And I know we have students in California and Utah, New Jersey. We can see that are tuning into the live stream. So don't be shy and go ahead and send us a question. All right.
Yeah,
so,
you can ask us questions about anything.
Okay, this next question is probably one you get a lot. So I've heard that you refer to games that are like educational or serious games. And can you talk to us sort of like about what that means? Like when we're talking about an educational game or a serious game, what is?
Yeah. So games get talked about in lots of different ways. And one of the ways they get talked about is as serious games. And that sort of says, is this game designed for something more than just entertainment, right? So for example, today a new video game is being released. The new Star Wars virtual reality game is being released. And even though that might be serious in tone, right? There might be serious moments in it. We would call that an entertainment game. But a game like Dino Lab, or another great example is I'm working on a virtual reality training tool for social workers so they can go into virtual homes and learn how to be a social worker. That would be a serious game as well. It's like a video game. It's got points and achievements and graphics and all the fun stuff that makes a game engaging, but it's designed for something more than just entertainment. And those things can look like education, or they can look like physical therapy. We've made video games to help people with back injuries. It can look like training. In education, you learn things, and in training, you learn a specific skill. So, for example, we might make a video game to help doctors learn a new way of giving stitches. And that's a very fine motor skill, right? That you have to get right, because nobody wants a big ugly stitch or a big ugly scar, right? So we might make a video game to help out with that. But there are lots of video games being used for lots of reasons. The other type of serious game that's really important to think about is these crowdsourcing video games. So for example, sometimes scientists need help. And so they make a video game where if people play this video game, the scientists get help from them. And an example of this is a video game you can still play today called Fold It. And Fold It was a game made up in Washington, and they were studying cancer, and it's almost like a puzzle. And so they needed help. And so they got just thousands and thousands of people online to play these puzzles that actually help them unlock the mystery of certain types of cancer. And so there's a whole range of serious games. And I tell you what's interesting, though, is these days that line is getting blurrier because there's all this wonderful research now about how playing video games can be good for your health, and particularly your mental health. And so a lot of times people are saying, well, maybe all games are getting closer and closer to being slightly serious. They have uses other than we thought originally.
That's so interesting. All right, well, this is a fun question. Shelby has asked, what's the most awesome game? And that seems like a very open-ended question.
Yeah. Shelby, I think easily the most awesome game ever made is Tic-Tac-Toe. No one's ever played that game more than that, right? No, but seriously, as far as video games go, there are so many wonderful video games out there. And the market has changed so much. So I'm a little older, so my favorite games tend to be a little older. I like Pac-Man and things like that, but I still play Pokemon with my goddaughter, and I'll still play all the fun new games like Call of Duty and things like that as well. But as far as like most popular games of all time, which is an interesting question, the most sold video game of all time is actually Tetris. And Tetris is a game where you have little blocks that fall out of the sky, and you put them together, and then they make blocks, right? And those things disappear. And then another one of the biggest video games of all time is a game called The Sims. And The Sims was a game where it was almost like the creator described it as a virtual dollhouse. You have these people, they walk around and they move, and then you manage their lives. But today, the big jam, it seems to be these online games, games like Roblox or Minecraft, or Fortnite, are doing massive amounts of business. And more importantly, um, Roblox in particular and Fortnite are doing really wonderful new things. Like Roblox lets people make their own video games. So, like some people just play games in Roblox, but there's a massive community of people who are using Roblox to make new video games. So it's inspiring a whole generation of new game developers. And then games like Fortnite, they have their game, but then they also do things like throw virtual concerts. So artists like Marshmello did a virtual concert in Fortnite, and it's the biggest concert the world has ever seen because millions of people showed up. And that's something you couldn't do in real life, right? There's just no stadium big enough to hold 1 million people, much less 10 million people. And Fortnite said, well, let's do virtual concerts, and everyone puts on their outfits and goes virtual dancing, and it's a lot of fun. So video games are only getting bigger, and one of the reasons is because they get to use for all sorts of crazy things now.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. And I think you answered part of Shelby's second question about, what is your favorite game? Montana wrote in, has sort of a similar question. What is the coolest game that you've built? So maybe like your favorite game you've worked on.
Yeah, I can tell you my top two. Well, that's a tough one. I'll give you my top two favorite ones, and I'll talk about a couple my students have made too. So Dino Lab is a personal favorite of mine. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it looks really cool. I'm a big fan of paleontology. So you've played Dino Lab. I hope you enjoyed playing it as much as we enjoyed building it. Another serious game that I worked on, though, that was just a ton of fun is I built a skiing game and a sailing game called Tetra Ski and Tetra Sail. And what they do is they are skiing games and sailing games for the disabled. So if somebody has damaged their back and they no longer have use of their arms or legs, many of them still want to be involved in sports. And so this is a video game that lets them ski down Alta or sail a boat across lakes in Utah using either a joystick with one hand or even a straw in their mouth. So they can just put this straw in their mouth and control the game. And what's really cool about it is it's a fun game. People play it like crazy. It's a good time, but it also trains them to use we have an actual skiing chair that you can sit in and use a straw to actually go down a real hill and control it. But as you can imagine, you might want to practice that before you do it. And so that's what the game is for. And so we have a real sailboat and a real ski chair that you can control with just a straw in your mouth. But then we made video games to train people how to do them, and it's a lot of fun. But my students have gone on to work on lots of big commercial games. I have a student who is a lead designer on Halo. I have a student who is a lead designer on Pokemon Go. One of my students is a sound designer for the new Star Wars virtual reality game, which is really cool. And then we've got students working all around the country and the world on all sorts of fun video games that I'm pretty proud of and I always enjoy playing.
Yeah, that is super cool. You touched on this a little bit, which is maybe why Connor submitted this question, which is a great one. Connor said, "My mom says that video games aren't good for you, and so Connor only is allowed to play video games for half an hour a day. How can I convince her that games are good for me?"
Yeah, Connor, that's an excellent question. And I think that I talked to a lot of parents about this, and I had my own story about this. My dad felt the same way growing up. And I grew up playing a fair amount of video games, but you'd say sometimes you're playing too many video games. And then I made a career out of this, and I've done a lot of good things, I believe, with this. And then a few years back, he's all, well, I guess maybe I made a mistake there. Maybe it was okay that you played all those video games when you were a kid. But I think that one of the things to think about is it's not so much, there's good research on why video games are good for you. And if you look it up, if you Google um, Animal Crossing is good for you, it should pop up. There's new news articles on why people who play Animal Crossing and other video games are experiencing positive mental health, right? We know that video games are good for your mental health. We know that they're a really rapid way to learn. We know for older adults, they actually help with what's called brain plasticity. It's like just like you work out your muscles, you need to work out your mind. And video games are an easy way to do that to help older adults, like grandpas and grandmas, stay mentally agile and be less forgetful and things like that. But so I think there's a bunch of good research on video games being good for you. But the problem, what most parents actually have a problem with, is not necessarily always the video games, but the social stuff around it, right? So are you still doing your chores? Are you playing with your brothers and sisters? Video games, it's like breakfast. It's part of a healthy life, right? And so I think that it's some parents are really hard on video games, and there's you can always send them to me. I'll talk to them. Or there's lots of great articles if you Google on are video games good for you. But this is not a new question. When I first started doing this job, uh, well over a decade ago, I had to convince a lot of people that video games were okay at a university because people were worried, is it okay to study video games? And the answer, of course, is yes. And we have, 800 students studying video games now at the U. But yeah. This is normal. Parents worry about pinball, parents worry about rock and roll, parents worry about video games. It's a sign that they care about you, right? But it's okay if you both want to Google, are video games good for you or are video games bad for you? You can read some stuff together and you might both learn something.
That's so great. Yeah, that's great advice. We received a question from Erica, and Erica, I guess, is in Vienna, Austria, wondering about what fields are serious games applied to. And I think you named a couple of like health and education or maybe training.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that.
Yeah.
Erica, I've had a student from Vienna in the past, so it's great to answer your question. Um, Yeah, especially in Europe, you see a lot of video games being used in areas that were just starting to use them in America. So it's much more common to see video game use, for example, in care homes or homes for the elderly. So, for example, I went to Amsterdam once to see a bunch of games that they were making there, and they had like games for older adults who had arthritis in their hands. And to get them a little exercise and to get them a little mental health, they made a game that had a pillow, and you would just hug this pillow and it would make the character jump on screen. And so it's almost like Super Mario Brothers, maybe a little slower than Super Mario Brothers, but you're this little bear and you're walking around the forest and you're collecting gems and leaves, and you control it by, squeezing a pillow. My friend Lindsay Grace made a very similar one where you hug a teddy bear, and the bear jumps on the screen, and so it's a lot of fun as well. Those kind of games are. His game was used to talk about parenting and relationships, but there were lots of those kinds of games used for um, not just education, but like anxiety reduction to help people feel less stress in their lives, or depression to help them feel less sad in their lives. And then also social engagement. People love playing together. So video games help them with that. But certainly in medicine, they're popular. In education, they're popular. And education can be everything from school education, like and love, to corporate education when you need to teach an executive how to do a new thing in their job. They might play a simulation or a video game to help them with that. So we can simulate and make video games out of all sorts of stuff. So all sorts of domains are using it now. Government uses it too. So there are lots of politicians who like to use video games to simulate activities and then also to teach people. I played a game called Budget Hero once and used it in a class. And it was a video game about the federal budget. How does the American government spend your tax dollars? And it was a really cool video game. I learned a lot.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I sort of hesitated for a second because Erica had a second question. The second question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're just fine. The second question was sort of on a different topic, and that's why I was like, "Is this the same?" Okay. The second question was, so it wasn't a two-part question. The second question was, did you use the design box technique to develop DinoLab? And of course, then we have to ask, what is design box?
Wow, I'm so impressed that she knows about the design box. That just made my day, right? So thank you very much. The design box is a yes, we did use the design box on Dino Lab, and we used it multiple times. We ran sessions with multiple junior high school students, with teachers, with the incredible scientists, paleontologists, and designers at the Natural History Museum of Utah. There's a whole talented group of people there that we worked with, and then with my students as well. And so what the design box is normally people like brainstorming, where they say, "All right, everyone, throw your ideas out there, and we'll write them on the board." But sometimes some people are shy and they don't want to put their ideas on the board, or sometimes it's difficult to choose which idea to make. And so what the design box says instead is it says, let's not talk about what we're going to make. Instead, let's spend some time talking about what it needs to do. So we talk about, if Dino Lab solves a problem, what problem does it solve? What should it look like? What should it feel like? What kind of computers does it need to run on and where? It's very different to make a mobile phone game than to make a computer game. And so once we talk about all those things, we have a box that all those ideas are around. And then when we brainstorm ideas, they fit inside that box. So we say, oh, yeah, I have to remember it has to work on a computer lab, be less than 15 minutes long. It has to be right for school age students and exciting for them. And then it's got to teach principles of paleontology, as adaptation and critical thinking. And those talking about the constraints first lets people be more creative when they design things. And we got designs from everyone. And so what we do then is we take all those designs from teachers, scientists, designers, students, and then we look at them all and see where the commonalities are, and then we build that. And so really the design of Dino Lab was a whole bunch of people working together to come up with it. And the design box is a tool to help do that.
That's great. All right. I think that you also talked about this a little bit, but maybe you can go more in depth. Sophia's wondering, what's the hardest part of building video games?
Meetings. Going to too many meetings. No, the hardest part about video game, it all depends. So different people have different jobs in video games. So a programmer might have a difficult time with a particular area, like networking or getting it to work on lots of different computers. That's always very difficult. It's easier to make a video game for your computer, but to get it to work on everyone's computer can sometimes lead to complications, right? Can sometimes be difficult. For artists, they have a lot of really interesting problems. So artists not only have to create all the beautiful assets you see, like an artist will make everything from the what we call the UI elements, the elements up here, the little buttons that you touch and the menus that you use, to what's called an in-game asset, like the dinosaur itself, right? And so they have to model that and texture that. But then they have to, what happens is, it's just like when you go to the store and you see something you like and you bring it home and it doesn't fit in your house. The same thing is true of art. When you're making this art, frequently the size of the files are just gigantic. But a video game has so many art assets in it, you have to figure out how to make those small enough so that the computer can run quickly. Otherwise, if you have too much art in your game and you didn't what we call optimize it, the computer would run so slow. And so that's a really tough thing. They not only have to be able to have the creative vision to make beautiful things, but they have to have the technical skill to make it in a way that a computer can run. And I wasn't joking about meetings. Producers are people who organize, schedule, and run meetings. And that's a difficult job, right? Because everyone wants to do their work. but it's like a dance. You have to keep everyone on the same page working together, and that's a producer's job. And so if you think about them, they're like a conductor in a band or a leader for a ballet, right? They got to keep everyone moving together and moving well. And that's a tough job. The toughest job for me with video games is putting them down, though. When we start playing these games, I really enjoy them and I like testing them. So I always have to remind myself, it's time to stop testing these games. Let's go do something else.
That's great. Um, Alex is wondering, what games are you working on now?
You know, Alex, that's an excellent question. We're working on that virtual reality social work trainer that we talked about. I've got a couple virtual reality games in the pipe right now. I've got another virtual reality game that's really fun where two of them actually. One of them you are learning to be a surgeon, and so it's a surgery simulator where you are in an ER and you have to do things, and it's kind of exciting, right? It's like living out one of the movies or living out one of the TV shows, right? But then I'm working on this game for everyone, to be honest. There's a program in our country called All of Us, and what it's trying to do is research genetics from all sorts of people across America so that we can make better medicine. Some medicine works well for some people, but not all medicine works well for all people. So they're trying to understand individual human bodies more, genetics more. And so this is a video game that people play to help them learn about genetics. And so if you go to a fair or a festival or do it online, you would put on the VR headset and we would actually have you like collect a blood sample from someone or or swab their mouth with a little Q-tip to get genetic material and then analyze it. And it doesn't sound fun, but we've made a really cool game out of it, right? And so it's the genetic science video game, right? It's a pretty exciting one that we're working on right now. But my student games, boy, I tell you what, I've got some good student games we're working on right now too. I've got one game that is called uh, Shattered Slime, where you run around and you're this little cute ball of slime, and you're trying not to freeze or fall so you don't break. And it's just adorable. It's an adorable little video game that you might be able to see in the spring.
Very cool. That's super cool. Well, we are almost out of time. I want to thank all the students for all the questions. They were fantastic. Maybe we have time for just one more question that is from the museum. And so we would love for you to talk about video games have gone from being entertainment to include being used for learning, which you've discussed a lot. What do you think the future holds for games and gaming, and what are you the most excited about when you think about the future?
Yeah, I tell you, there are a number of things that I'm excited about for the future, um, and I think that there's a theme that's happening right in our culture that I'm pretty excited about, and that is in the past we really believed that everything that we did for learning was about work, right? And so learning was work. But now we're seeing a real interest in learning as play. That playful learning is a good way to learn things that through experiments and hands-on activities, as well as games that we learn really well. And I think this is actually not just going to be true of learning, but of things like health and fitness and even our jobs. So I think the future is going to be a playful future, is what I'm looking forward to. I recently, or not that recently, about a couple of years ago, I spoke at a conference with a bunch of people who ran hospitals, and they were talking about how come nobody does their physical therapy, right? If they get a back injury, people don't do their physical therapy. And the answer was simple, because it's too much like work, right? But if you make it like play, if you make physical therapy into a game or find an activity that they can do, people will do it. People enjoy playing basketball more than they do doing push-ups. Folks like skiing more than they do jogging in place. And so we already know that sports and games are a great way to get people moving and keeping healthy. And so we just need to apply those concepts to lots of things in our life. And I think people will enjoy their day more, and a playful person is a happy person. So I think we're going to see more of that in the future.
Thank you. That was such a great, great response. We really appreciate taking the time to chat with us, and we're out of time, so we're going to wrap up. I just wanted to mention to everyone who's tuning in, we will be having more Research Quest Live classes and Q&As after the new year. So please check out our schedule, and thank you again, Roger.
Thank you, and I'm happy to come back anytime. And thanks to all the students who are playing Dino Lab. I really appreciate it, and I hope you had a good time.
All right, you have a great day.
You too, bye.